Random thoughts. This video I'm going to talk about how the British saw Kenya, the East Africa Protectorate, as a white man's land, and how they considered West Africa and Uganda as not conducive for the settlement of the white people. So for the British, Kenya, and I guess you can include Zimbabwe and South Africa, those regions, maybe Zambia, Botswana, those were white man's land, and it's for a reason. And the reason I've mentioned it while doing videos out of this book that I'm reading, the book is The East Africa Protectorate, and it is written by one Sir Charles Eliot. Now, Sir Charles Eliot was this British administrator who came to Kenya and was appointed to become what was known as the Commissioner of British East Africa. And he served in that office from 1902 to 1904. Then he resigned, and he published this book in 1905. Now, this is a very comprehensive document, and it seems like it was meant to facilitate or to give any arriving British or any British who wanted to come to East Africa all the knowledge they needed to survive on the land or to make better decisions about their stay. Now, when you read the book, and I've mentioned this, you realize that Sir Charles Eliot saw this land as a land that had a lot of potential, not the entire land, but some specific areas of the land, especially for agriculture, and because of the fertility of the land, but also because of the climate that he found to be so conducive for the European settlement. And in some parts of the book, he describes some parts of East Africa Protectorate, Kenya, to be as beautiful as summer in Britain, and that was so conducive for the settlement of the Europeans. Now, in this video, I'm going to read a part where he talks about East Africa Protectorate being a white man's land and why he thought Uganda and West Africa were not that good for the Europeans. And this is what he says. He says, in considering the relationship which should prevail between the two races, the main point to be observed is their relative numbers. In this respect, our East African territories show great differences. The Kingdom of Uganda, and one may say the Uganda Protectorate as a whole, has sufficient and fairly thick population. Also, the climate of the greater part is not such as attract Europeans. It is therefore adapted to be a black man's country, like our West African colonies. But in the East African Protectorate, the case is different. The native population is very small. Only two districts, Kavirondo and Kikuyu, can be said to be thickly populated. Large areas are inhabited, and these areas, with others, are climatically and otherwise suited to European colonization. In other words, the interior of the protectorate is a white man's country. Yeah, so that's what he says in the book, that several reasons make the East Africa Protectorate to be a white man's land. And one of that is, of course, as he says, there were large tracts of land that were uninhabited. But I don't want to buy that, or I can't buy that. And he mentions this in other parts of the book. They seemed to be vacant because of the way the natives, the so-called natives, decided to use the land. And he mentions that the Africans who were on the land were so wasteful when it came to the use of the land. And he calls it wasteful because most of them practiced pastoralism and nomadism. They moved from one part to the other, and that's because they moved with the weather and the climate and how the year will progress, seasons, that is. So he says the Maasai, for example, will move around, and the Maasai understood how they were using the land. And he says even the Kikuyu, who were more settled, also used the land almost the same way as the Maasai used it, and that is they did their cultivation, they did their farming, they'll do the farming for maybe a few seasons and then they abandon the land and move to a new patch of the land, and then they move around and then come back to that one that they used maybe a few years ago. So the Europeans, at least to Sir Charles Eliot, that was being wasteful. But we can look at it in a different way. It wasn't wasteful. It was a proper way of using the land. But anyways, that's what he says. So he says there were open tracts of land as one of the reasons why he thought this land was suitable for the settlement of the Europeans. But of course, he also mentions the climate, and he says the climate was conducive. And yeah, so at some point, the Europeans thought that this was a perfect land for settlement of the British. Those are my random thoughts.